Good afternoon. Excuse my hobbling about, but not so long ago I had a knee replacement, which some of you here will know something about. They have promised me that it will be a full recovery after a year. And what? Better I don't have to wait 2 years. So it is also lovely to be out of the cold and wind of New York City for a while. I woke up this morning feeling as if my knee was all better. This is the second time that I have spoken here, and my wife and I spoke together last time because we had written a book together, and this one I wrote all by myself alone, which after two co-authored books was a new and novel experience. I survived. I survived, and I survived with the help of Lee, who has always been my favorite editor. And with that in mind, this morning I asked her and our wonderful hostess, Daphne McGill, which of the various ways, and I named them, I should use to start the talk with. And one of them was by telling a story. And that's what I'm going to do. The story is a curious and wonderful one, and it is a useful introduction, I think, to the book. The book contains a chapter on John D. Rockefeller, Sr., and is entitled Rich as Rockefeller, and rich he was. The richest American who has ever lived. His fortune in contemporary, modern, that is, dollars, conservative estimate was $190 million. Now, this takes poor Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, who have $30, $50 million, and puts them in the shade. Washington was also an interesting character because as President of the United States, he was the richest president we've ever had. But I want to talk about Rockefeller and talk about Rockefeller's death, because it was not quite what he was hoping. He hoped he would live to be 100, and he made it to 97. And then there was the whole question of how you were going to lay him to rest, this very rich man. Well, his favorite place was right here in Florida, and that's where he spent most of his final years. So there was a small service here, and then he was taken in a casket to Kykuit, which was his home on the shores of the Hudson River, built for him by his son, a far grander place than he wanted it to be. But nonetheless, he did spend time there. And so there was a service there with organs playing softly in his music room. And after that, he was loaded on a train again to be taken, his body, to Cleveland, Ohio, where he began his business career. And he was buried there next to his mother and his wife. And there was, I'm sure within the family, considerable discussion about how they were going to, as it were, memorialize the site. Well, what they decided to do was build a very large obelisk, which looks like a smaller version of the Washington Monument. And was Rockefeller Washingtonian? I wouldn't have said so, and I don't think he would have said so, but I think his family were happy thinking so. So this is what he got, his memorial. And it stands on a kind of platform where you have to go up a number of steps to get to it. Now, one of the things Rockefeller did in his life towards the end was to hand out to anybody who was anywhere near him, but mostly children, shiny new dimes. And this was something that actually endeared him to his fellow countrymen. Ivy Lee, who was hired by the family as kind of public relations director, is credited with having the idea to do this, but it was actually a book that Rockefeller had read, the correspondence of Amos Lawrence, who is another character who figures in the book. So there was this whole tradition of the shiny dimes. Well, if you go to that site with the obelisk to this day, you will find that people bring shiny dimes and lay them on the stairs, which I think is a marvelous tribute to something or other. But the question is what? What is going on when people do that? And I think it's fascinating to ruminate on that subject. And in a sense, the book that I have written is one that finds its heart in those kinds of issues. Issues involving what? Well, issues involving very rich people, the legends that they construct about themselves, particularly their generosity, and about the American people and how we have collectively responded to those individuals and their lives and their money and their generosity and the stories that they construct about themselves, which is a lot to do in what is a fairly short book. And I want to go further by explaining just a little about how the book came to be written, because it's an odd story, but I set out to write a short book. Other books I've written were not hugely long, but long, book length, usual book length. And I thought, well, it would be nice to write a short book. And I was going to write a short book, and it was going to have a series of chapters on mostly people that I'd written about before, and they had these characteristics or experiences in common. They were all very rich, all among the richest Americans of their day. They mostly, to some extent, angered their fellow countrymen, some of them a whole lot, in the process of becoming rich. And the third thing about them that they had in common was that they were all generous with their money. They gave millions, billions of dollars away to make the world a better place. And the question then of how these people made their money, how they lived their lives, why they decided to be as philanthropic as they were, those were a series of questions that I thought could usefully be asked about these lives. And what I discovered was, which at first surprised me, was when you put the lives next to one another, they did have the things that I've mentioned in common. But there were also a whole lot of things that they didn't have in common. They made their money in different ways. They began giving it away at different points in their lives. They gave to quite different things. If there was a pattern here, it was not a pattern that went very far beneath the surface. There was a wealth of facts lying beneath the surface that it was very hard to construct generalizations about. And I think that there was something else that I became very conscious of when I was writing the book, and that is that the stories could not just be about them, because they didn't live lives in isolation, but it also had to be about Americans and about how Americans have perceived these people, what they thought of them. And that was a trickier thing to get at. But it was important because there was a sense in which these individuals were playing to the American people always. They were putting on performances that they knew were going to be looked at, observed, considered, weighed in moral terms. and they wanted to be sure